Creatures like Hyaenodon in this video are members of a group called the Creodonts, which are related to the true carnivorous mammals we have today, but are not true carnivorans. Instead, the Creodonts, including the Oxyenids and Hyaenodonts, are distant extinct relatives of the living carnivorous mammals. Most of them were an early experiment in the carnivorous mammal before the true carnivorans evolved. All carnivorous mammals, whether they be creodonts or true carnivorans, are defined by a robust set of teeth called carnassials. These enlarged carnassials form a shearing pair between the upper and lower jaw that allow them to slice up meat and in some cases cut tendons and even in a few of them break bones. Without them, a carnivorous mammal could never subsist on a diet of meat. These slicing blades have very precise occlusion, like a pair of scissors, and if they're not precisely interlocked, they do not shear and do not cut meat. In all living carnivorans, like dogs, cats, and bears and their relatives, the shear is between the last upper premolar and the first molar of the jaw. This upper P4, lower M1 shearing pattern is unique to modern carnivorans, but very different from the creodonts. Instead, creodonts had their shearing carnassials further back in the jaw, the upper M1 and the lower M2 in Oxyenids, and the upper M2 and lower M3 in the Hyaenodonts. This means in order to slice food or break up bones and tendons, they needed to process them from the way far back of their jaw, which may have limited their evolutionary flexibility. Some paleontologists have argued that when carnivorans came along with their carnassial pair much further forward in their jaw, it allowed them more flexibility to do things with their teeth behind the carnassials, as well as those in front. The first group of creodonts to evolve were the Oxyenids, which dominated the early Cenozoic from about 65 million years ago until about 50 million years ago. Oxyenids had relatively primitive skulls and teeth, with relatively simple shear, suitable for eating most kinds of prey, and not very specialized in any particular direction like modern carnivorans are. They also had relatively small brains compared to modern carnivorans. Some of them were built very lightweight, like Sinopa, almost the size of a weasel or a cat, while others were more heavily built and resembled lions or wolverines. Most of them were plantigrade, walking on the palms of their hands and soles of their feet. This meant that they were not fast runners like true carnivorans, which run on the tips of their toes. One of the largest and heaviest of all the Oxyenids was Oxyenid itself, from beds around 55 to 52 million years old. It was about the size of a cougar, only more heavily built, and dominated the landscape around 55 million years ago, being the largest carnivorous mammal at a time when true carnivorans were weasel-sized. An even more impressive Oxyenid was Patriofelis, from beds around 50 million years old. It was the size of a small lion, or even a small bear, and was very heavily built with impressive canines and slicing teeth. Patriofelis was by far the largest carnivorous mammal in its landscape around 50 million years ago in Europe, Asia, and North America, and could prey upon nearly any animal that lived in its time, since none of them were very fast runners either. An even bigger Oxyenid was Hemipsalodon, for beds around 42 million years old in Oregon and Texas. It was a truly huge bear-sized predator. Yet not all Oxyenids were built like bears or cats. Some of them were built like saber-tooths, including the Creodonts, which had huge canines like a saber-toothed cat, except this is a creodont and not a cat, which is a true carnivoran. The Creodonts are an excellent example of convergent evolution, where the ability to develop large, stabbing canines appeared at least 6 different times in the mammals alone. In addition to these forms known from North America, there was Sarcassodon, found in Mongolia in the 1920s. Although only the front part of the skull is preserved, it was a huge predator with gigantic stabbing canines and incisors. Like other Oxyenids like Patriofelis, it was the largest predator in Mongolia around 40 million years ago. The second main group of creodonts are the Hyaenodonts, which are best known from Hyaenodon itself, which was first discovered in the Badlands of South Dakota in the 1840s. Like other creodonts, Hyaenodonts are not true carnivorans because their carnassial shear is in the far back of the mouth between the M2 and M3. However, recent research has shown that the creodonts are not a natural group, and that Hyaenodonts are actually closer to true carnivorans than they are to other types of creodonts like Oxyenids. Hyaenodon was the largest predator in both North America and Eurasia from about 34 million years ago until about 20 million years ago, and then it vanished. Unlike oxyenids, it had a much more gracile build of its limbs and was apparently much faster a runner than any kind of oxyenid was. They had massive skulls with very sharp teeth, but not actually much like a true hyena because they did not have specialized bone crushing teeth like hyenas do. Dozens of species have been named in both Eurasia and North America, including the huge Hyenodon horridus with a skull over a foot long, to the much smaller Hyenodon mustelinus, and numerous other species that have names. Hyenodon was the largest predator in the time of the Badlands between 34 and 30 million years ago, much larger than the weasel-sized dogs of the time or the cat-like nimravids. My good friend Jim Millett has done excellent studies of how their teeth and jaws worked and showed that they have a very distinctive pattern of shearing between the upper and lower carnassials as they close their mouth, and the notches in their shearing teeth act as miniature guillotines to cut tendons as well as flesh. Millett showed that the inner wall of the upper molar sliced against the blade-like face of the outer wall of the lower molar, and they had a very peculiar pattern of occlusion. As these slicing blades wore out, they tended to rotate inward until by the very end they were slicing off the very tips of the cusps of their slicing teeth. The Badlands produced literally hundreds of fossils of this Hyenodon, including the two in the front row of this illustration. The bigger one is Hyenodon horridus. In addition, there are from Egypt around the same age an animal called Apterodon, which is a hyenodont that was more adapted to living in water, with a very long tail and a very weasel-like body, even though it was the size of a cougar. In addition to Apterodon from Africa, there was the bear-sized Megistotherium from about 22 million years old until about 10 million years old in Eurasia. Megistotherium was a truly impressive predator that was the dominant force on the landscape during its time. Even bigger than that was Hyaenoluros, which was bigger than a bear and was the dominant large predator in Eurasia and Africa through about 22 million years old until about 5 million years ago. Even more impressive than this was the recent discovery of a fossil from Kenya from beds around 22 to 18 million years old, known as Simba kubwa, meaning great lion in Swahili. Its enormous jaws tell us that it was again about a bear-sized or larger animal capable of taking down very large prey, including even the mastodonts that were found in Africa in the early Miocene. This great radiation hyenodonts, which has started at 34 million years ago, finally vanished in Africa and Eurasia around 5 million years ago. Nobody knows the reason for sure, although usually they blame the evolutionary radiation of dogs, cats, bears, and other modern carnivores that might have driven them out. Whatever the reason, 5 million years ago, the long evolutionary radiation of the Creodonts, which had been the first carnivorous mammals on Earth, finally ended. And today only true carnivorans, dogs, cats, bears, and weasels, persist on this planet.